Tell me about your social background, where you grew up.
Right. Well, myself and my younger brother Bobby would have been born in Leaning Gardens. Johnny would have been about a year old when we moved to Leaning Gardens, brand new house. My parents would have come from, the Whites were from Molecular Road, and my mother's people were from Bishop Street and Hamilton Street. And Johnny would have been born, I think, in Hamilton Street in Grants. And when he was about a year, we got the house, and then I was born the following year, and Bobby was born. That completed our family of 6. So that's basically the background.
And was your father working?
My father was a plumber.
Was he?
But often, my father was a bit of a trade union man, and at times he wouldn't have been able to get work because of that. But our memories, Johnny's memory would be no different. It would be of going into a brand new house from the way people had to live in the Bogside and so on, which is overcrowding and all, to a roomy house with gardens and all, but absolutely nothing. My parents had nothing. And I have to say there are 2 major memories that I would have, and Johnny would have probably shared, that a lovely family, loving parents, brilliant street, Leaning Gardens, great neighbours, but poverty. And we would have shared that with many people and throughout the Craigan at the time. People came from nothing, people who were used to having nothing. A town of serious long-term unemployment, discrimination because people were from a nationalist stroke Catholic background. They weren't allowed jobs, and my father would have travelled a lot in the early days before we moved to Craigan to work in England. Couldn't get work here, even though he was a qualified plumber. My mother never worked outside the home, but many women kept the economy of Derry going. Hadn't it been for women working in the shirt factory, they could have shut the town down. It's as simple as that. So Derry is renowned for unemployment and for lack of housing, and that's where the civil rights begins.
And just in terms of, you kind of touched on it there, your experience of, and Johnny's experience of social injustice, the way we voting and gerrymandering and things like that.
Yeah.
Would you be in the age group where you would have experienced that?
Well, it wouldn't have affected us till later on, but we're aware of it. We're aware through hearing our parents talking about why there were no jobs, why there were no housing. And then my older sister, Tilly, when she first got married and they had her first child, I remember this very well. She had gone down with her husband to the housing trust, as it was then, I think, and asking about, they were living with us at the time, and so that there was about 8 or 9 of us in the house or whatever. And they told her, and she asked how long would she have to wait, and they said 10 years.
10?
And that was normal. And so they went to Lisburn, and within weeks had a job, 3-bedroom house, they both were working, and so that was the difference. So that's, we grew up with that. And then it wasn't until later on, maybe in our teen years, we started to find out that actually not everybody had a vote. And it didn't really matter if you had a vote or not, because they had divided the areas up in such a way that what they call gerrymandering, that there was, I think, I can't remember the numbers now, but I think something like 16 Unionist councillors to 8 Nationalist councillors, even though there was a vast majority of Nationalist people. So the gerrymandering sorted that out, so we were aware of that at the time, and that was a growing awareness over the 60s, I think, of injustice basically.
Do you think that people just accepted it? Or that's just the way it is?
Yes, there was that, but I think there was an underlying anger too. And people kept their heads down, because I remember very clearly playing football and stuff in Leaning Gardens, and the policeman walked up the street we cleared. Now this is a story you'll hear over and over again throughout the Derry area, Brandywell and all, because there was a fear of them. And I was aware to some extent, even as a very young boy, of the IRA campaign. Of hearing about bombs going off in custom stations and so, and my parents would have, don't be talking about that, that's dangerous stuff. It wasn't until much later on that we realised my mother's people had connections with that sort of history as well, but we didn't know anything that then. What we were aware of, that it was an oppressive type of state. And I think even in my teens I became aware, and Johnny would have been the main element in bringing this into our house more than anybody else. Around the age of 16 or 17 he would start to appear with James Connolly literature, and I would quietly read it at night, and that changed everything. You could start to see then what was happening here, that there was more to this than just a wee local police force and us and so on, and it was just unlucky that we had no jobs and so on. It wasn't like that at all. You could see that this is a history, and that was the beginning of political awareness for me. And Johnny brought that in. Johnny went out, worked in the BSR. I worked in the BSR.
What's that?
It was a British sound recording. It was a big factory in Blees Lane in Derry, and employed over 2,000 men. Now Johnny left school, went straight on there. I left school the year after, or a year and a half after, went straight on there. My younger brother Bobby left school, went straight on to the BSR. And Johnny became involved very quickly in there with trade union agitation. So he was immediately in that. It must have been in his blood or something. It wasn't for me or Bobby, I don't think, but he brought that very quickly to our home, and it was eye-opening.
Do you think so what was it through the trade union that he became active socially like that?
I don't know. I imagine that was his first. How he met or how he became involved in the Republican movement, I don't know the details of that, but I do know when I was about a year in the BSR, Johnny started to bring this literature on. So he'd already joined, although I wouldn't have known. He was already a member of the Young Republicans, or whatever it was they called themselves at the time. He would have kept that quiet from my parents, because they would have worried, obviously, because of the police and stuff and their own history that we didn't know about. I mean, it turns out that my mother's relations suffered greatly at the hands of the state. One uncle of my mother's particularly spent his last years in the Derry jail and wouldn't sign the paper to get himself out. His name was Bobby McInerney, and they released him to die, and he died within weeks of his release. So they had that own history to themselves, which they tried to protect us from. But Johnny brought it on. That's where it came from, and that's everything began to change in our home then.
Right. Like, what was the change?
The change developed over the next couple of years because Johnny got involved with selling United Irishman, which was banned. It was the Republican national newspaper. Now we're talking what they later called the official Republican movement. There was only one Republican movement. Cathal Golding was the leader of it in Dublin. Golding was the command leader or whatever, and some of those are political leaders, and they were moving very much to the left. Now I didn't know anything about this at the time, but Johnny was in those circles in Derry, moving about with that, making contacts. Guys with Mickey Montgomery, Red Mickey Doherty and people like that were all coming towards to agitate on housing and on unemployment and so on, which was the main thing. And so it was through that we began to see, our house begins to change, and the police start to arrive. That's what I mean. My mum and dad would have been quite nervous about that. Just, knock on the door, and a blue transit van sitting down with 5 or 6 cops in it looking up, and a cop stand at the door and me opening the door. John White. Yes, is he here? No, he's not. Where is he? I don't know. Would you tell him that we'll call again? We want to talk to him about a certain protest or whatever it happened to be. That was the first time we ever had police at our door, of course, because it would have been law-abiding like everybody else in Derry. And then it became a regular thing.
What year? What time?
I would say that would be, where is he? I ended up in the BSR 64. It's 65, 66.
So this would be before
the Troubles start. And
before any civil rights movement?
Yep.
So it caught the attention of the state?
Him and other active young Republicans. But then they see very quickly they created the Derry Housing Association, Derry Housing Action Committee, the Unemployed Action Committee, both. And so they were organising protests against unemployment, because everything that led to the 30 odd years stems out of economic oppression. It stems out of lack of housing, lack of jobs, low wages. That's where it came from. It wasn't waving flags. It wasn't anything to do with that. Yes, he was in that circle of Republicans, but the Republican movement from its centre in Dublin was already changing dramatically, you know, to the left. And so it was Marxist in Dublin. And there was a guy called Roy Johnson who was their theorist, and he was a Marxist. So that's the sort of, whatever meetings he was going to, that was the message. That this isn't about waving flags in your national country. This is about a class struggle. And Johnny was talking like that way back then. Do you know? So, massive change for everybody. But the police started to arrive, and as I say, that began to change everything. And that never ceased right through the end until Johnny actually went on her own in 1970, Motorman, whenever that was, 71 or whatever. Our house was raided kind of regularly, do you know, as well, during the Troubles. The Civil Rights campaign had begun. People were under attack from the police. I know, it was on the streets like everybody else. It was rioting, trying to defend your area and so on. And Johnny was at the forefront of all that too. So there was a lot of criticism from the old hands saying, you know, you're neglecting, we need defence of the areas, and you're talking about tenants associations and so on. So you could see where they were coming from too. And then that led to the split. And on one side of the split was the official Republican movement, and the other side was the professionals. And Johnny would have been very much on the official Republican movement side, not because he didn't think there was a need for armed resistance, because he did, and he was involved in it heavily. He was OC of the official IRA in Derry, so everybody knows this, you know. So he wasn't opposed to people defending themselves in any way they could, but what he was opposed to was any idea of the national pride thing. Johnny was never a patriot, national pride person. He was a socialist Republican. He believed, like James Connolly, in fact, Connolly was his greatest influence, that it wasn't worth fighting for, it would be worthless unless it was we're fighting for a socialist republic. Working class at the head of it. He was like that all his life. People tend to forget that and see him as a Republican military person. Now, he was a military person. He felt he had to be at the time. But there's a whole story around that too. He was mainly a political person. He was a socialist, more than anything else, in my opinion. And there's a way I can sharpen this up for you and bring it right up to the present day. From the earliest days, maybe 68, 69, certainly when the Civil Rights Movement started, and 69, and the Republican movement nationally split. Right from day one, Johnny predicted that the provisional IRA, the provisional Republican movement, would sell out everything they believed in. And it was kind of gobsmacking to hear him saying that, because you looked at people like McGuinness and them in that time, he thought, really militant, hard line, they'll never. He predicted they would do exactly what they have done recently, that they will accept Stormont rule, they will accept Northern Ireland. So you're asking him, where does this come from? And he's saying they follow the same line as militant republicanism, or what he called militant nationalism. Look at Fianna Fáil, because they come from the same people, they wear the same garments, and I have to say, he was absolutely right. He was totally right. And I mean, I would share that. I'm a socialist, not interested in their national, well, I'm interested in a united Ireland only if it's a socialist Ireland, only if it puts the working class at the head of the Republic. Because, I mean, after all the struggles that went on, after the War of Independence, after 1916 and all of that, what did it lead to? It, in my opinion, and in Johnny's opinion, it led to a narrow-minded, backward, clerical, gombeen state. Gombeen is a word, of course, which means wheeler-dealer. It's a word which I think it comes basically from the time of the famine, when people had their wee shops and exploited people who were dying of hunger. That's where gombeen, the word, comes from. And that's exactly the type of state we had after the War of Independence. Again, after 30 odd years of struggle, after tremendous suffering all round across the whole of Ireland and in England, when loads of people were maimed and killed and people died in jail. Look at the hunger strikes. For what? What did we gain? You know. And now, if you're looking at a strictly nationalist, provo-republican view of it, nothing. They have gained. What have they gained? They have become now the governing a colonial state. They are now actually doing the job of unionism for the unionists. So they betrayed everything that they said they believed in. Johnny was saying this in 1969. He's one of the few people who said it in 69. And I meet people all the time, as you can imagine, and about people I haven't seen for years, and they say, Johnny, you know, they have a great word on him because they remember he recruited them and so on, and he was saying these things, and it's been proved right.
And but what did he think that? What was his view on, you know, where you have to make a sacrifice for peace?
Yes.
Did he understand that maybe that you have to give up?
Yes, compromise.
Compromise and recognise the Northern State in order for peace.
Yeah, he didn't believe that was right. What he said was that was inevitable, given that the Republican movement were, how could I put this, pro-capitalist, pro-corporate, right? That they came from an ideology that was middle class, and it does, Republican movement does come from that nationalism. He says Connolly and him and all the other people who would have been on the left come from a different ideology, which is socialist, and therefore they wouldn't have been prepared to go into government in a divided Ireland. They wouldn't have been prepared to share power with parties like the Unionist Party. This is a landlord party, do you know? So there'd have been always an opposition to that, and you might say, well, you know, it was the only game in town, what else could you do? Now, that doesn't mean to say he would have been for the war going on, because it was quite clear after some time that this war was going nowhere, you know. And I mean, when you look now at the relay area, the continuity of Republicans, you know, when are they ever going to learn? They're putting their own people at risk again. They're, you know, the bombing and so on. Innocent people are dying again. And for what? Look at the last 30 years when the Republican movement had major support amongst working class towns and cities, no more so than people from Chantallo and the Brandywell and so on and so forth. And what was the outcome? Nothing. You know, we've still unemployment here. We have a housing problem here again now. We have all our teenagers are heading off again. So, you know, where are the factories now? We don't have women in the shirt factories now, they're all gone. Who's holding it up now? What's holding it up now is the comfort blanket, to some extent, is the British benefit system. Take that away, so we're back to absolutely nothing at all. So there's been no real gains made.
In terms of, you know, the civil rights movement, people think it's over.
The civil rights movement was limited in what it could gain, right? Now, and the civil rights movement obviously took its influence from what was going on primarily in America. Because I remember watching the old black and white TV myself, it was all we had in the corner, and feeling this pride when I heard seen all these black people marching along and singing "We Shall Overcome." And I remember thinking, this is before the trouble started. Wouldn't it be great to be part of that? Like? But it was limited what it could achieve, especially in this country. When you started to unravel it and realised, well, it's about more than just being around. Now, it did achieve that, and it achieved, as Eamon McCann often says, the biggest achievement of the civil rights movement was the housing executive, strangely enough. Because before that, you had one man, Anderson, the mayor, allocating houses to everybody in the town. That's exactly how it was. But after that, then you had a point system, which everybody else admired. Right now, of course, they're cutting away the housing executive. They're going to shut it down. They're privatising houses and so on and so forth. That was a major gain. And the jobs front, very little gain. So it was limited. What the civil rights movement never approached, and what it never probably could approach, because it was a joint class thing, wasn't part of the class struggle. It didn't put the working class at the front, or the needs and the interest of the vast majority of people, working class people. And in that I include the teachers, the doctors, the social workers, the carers, all of those people I see as working class people. It didn't put those at the centre of it. That's the difference between Connolly and Johnny Socialism, Republicanism, whatever you want to call it, and the rest.
Well, what was the ideology behind the civil rights movement then? You know, like the John, people
Yes.
think, when people think civil rights, they think John Hume.
Yeah.
It's some, you know, the history is written by the victor almost.
Yes.
You know, by the main
Yes.
head.
Yeah.
People think, what was his ideology as opposed to Johnny's?
I'll give you a brief, my view of how that came about. It came about on the streets. The first actions came about through the Derry Housing Association and the Derry Unemployed Group. And they pulled a caravan across Hampton Street with a man living in a caravan, damp conditions. And the police didn't arrest him. And then the next day they took over a house up in Harvey Street. A woman, Nellie MacDonald I think her name was being evicted. And they walked in and took over the house and said, "You're not evicting her." They got that woman a house, right? That's how it began. So it came out of a working class need, it came out of poverty, it came out of lack of housing, the civil rights movement did. But very, very quickly it was taken over by the middle class, Catholic middle class in this town, as they do, because they were the ones mainly with the education and with the money and so on and so forth. And John Hume was part of that. And people like Eamon McCann, even then, were opposed to that. And he actually walked out of the big meeting that the Derry Citizens Defence Committee was set up on. He stormed out of that, if I remember rightly, in the City Hotel. Johnny and them stayed on. They thought they could work within it. But of course, McCann was right. Very quickly, the middle class took control of the civil rights movement. So it was limited. It wasn't a class movement, but it was a necessary movement. It was every bit as necessary in Derry and in Belfast as it was in Alabama or any of the black states in America. So, but it was limited. So what we never got, and this is where, I mean, how far do you want to go back? We're 100 years on from the 16 Rising, and James Connolly, who in my belief was the greatest visionary this country has ever seen to this day. But he was in a minority then. Throughout the 30s, left-wing Republicans were in a minority throughout all the rest of the struggles, and it was the same applied. Now they came in somewhere along the 60s, they took over the Republican movement, but look how long that lasted. The Nationalist, the middle class ideology took grip again, and socialism is always pushed to the side.
Well, you could tell me about what led up to the Battle of the Bogside and your memories and with Johnny's activity around then.
Right. Well, I mean, he had been heavily involved in, and our house then would have been quite busy with people coming and going and organising the demonstrations and so on. But when 1969 and the Orange Parade came along, I was down Bottom William Street with my buddies and all, looking across at them marching down Waterloo Place, and then the rioting started. Now that, as you know, led on to the Free Derry thing and all. Now Johnny had joined the Derry Citizens Defence Committee, and as a member of the Republican movement, and other members of the Republican movement, all involved in that, as well as citizens and, you know, Battle of the Bogside, all that people were involved in. And so it became a matter of defending your area, because of the attacks on the Bogside and so on were so vicious. Like, people forget this.
Who from?
From the RUC, often supported by Paisleyites, because they were there behind them throwing the stones and all. So that led on into the army coming in and so on. But Johnny was heavily involved before the army came in the defence of the Bogside. And he was seriously injured during a riot where actually somebody had dropped a bottle from the high flats and Johnny was underneath a long way down, and the bottle hit him here, glanced off him. He had a big scar down here. But I mean, obviously we were all involved in rioting. Do you know what I mean? It was just a community thing. It was an emotional thing, like. And I used to watch him. He would have been up at the front all the time. That was it. I mean, it was how he was. Do you know what I mean? He was fearless, like. And but a lot of stuff was going on then in the other meetings I would have known nothing about, because we were just the hoods, whatever, the rioters, you know. So I really didn't know the ins and outs of what they were doing. It wasn't until later then that it became a war, really. Then I don't know how much I can say about that, except that our own home became like a headquarters. And so there was a lot of stuff went on through the next few years. The police were raiding us all the time. Myself and my brother would have been pulled out of our beds at 4 in the morning. Johnny, of course, wouldn't be there because he was on the run already. And nights he would have been there, and there was a lot of nervousness. My father died in '69, so he missed all that fear, which is, you know. But my mother was there, and they were difficult times. They were, and now, interesting wee story. Just, I'll say this anyway. It doesn't matter. Johnny was interned, but they only held him for 3 days. But you see, the night of interment, word got out. People knew that there was, you know, it was likely to happen. Johnny had come home for whatever reason. They came up and banged on the door. Johnny could have been out the back. He didn't. And the reason he didn't, because he didn't want me and Bobby interned. He knew if he hadn't have been, if they hadn't got him, they would have took either one or both of us. So he walked out and opened the door to them. I mean, they'd been banging on the door. Within seconds, the whole street came alive, and the big families close to us, we would have been very close neighbours and so on. They'd have been very fond of Johnny. They spilled out onto the street with bottles and stones, and within literally a minute, it turned into a battlefield. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock. Mad. Johnny was thrown under the pig, lay on the thing. They were stamping on him and kicking him, and everybody went wild. And then off they went. But that was that experience. And then a lot of the other stuff that went on then, I have to say, I don't know about, because except that nights he would have been at home, but our house then became a central gathering place, so I would have met dozens and dozens and dozens of people who were involved in the official Republic movement at the time. They were interesting, scary times, but exciting as well.
And has, in the end of his journey, if he was satisfied with his work?
I couldn't say that. No, I think he felt that everything that they had struggled for had gone. You know, he was one of the founder members of the Socialist Republican Party in '74, and the INLA, along with Costello. He didn't stay on it very long, 2 years, and I remember very clearly, and my own younger brother Bobby remembers this too, the word he said about it when he left him. He says, the tail is still wagging the dog. What he meant by that was the military people were still taking the lead. What we needed was the socialist. So even within that movement, he could see that was going nowhere. And so, but he lived in Dublin then, he lived in Limerick, he lived all over, and he joined a Socialist Party with Bernadette Devlin and them. So I would say he was dissatisfied throughout the rest of his life that it hadn't gone that way. But he wouldn't have been the first. That's the way it was for socialists, and that's what people tend to forget. Johnny was a socialist, more than anything else. He became ill later on in his life, and when he died, now his own family, who, you know, there was, I think, 6 children, I think, and even my children and Bobby's children would have been quite surprised at the turnout at the funeral and the fact there was a big military funeral and all that, because, you know, they would have been reared up and never known this, you know, they kept it from them the way my parents did, and they were quite shocked, I think, to see the respect he was held in and so on. But no, I think he was unhappy at the end. I know he wrote the Bloody Sunday Inquiry. He read out his own view of that and handed it on to them, but he didn't go to it. Disappointed, as we are all today. About, I mean, when I look back on it now and everything, I mean, I've learned a whole lot myself over the years and stuff like. But every influence I have has come. Johnny brought it to our home. And we're grateful for it, because he opened people's eyes when people were unaware. He was of a generation, let me put it like this, it wasn't all of him. A generation who got up off their knees and took courageous decisions and actions day by day. But it turned to nothing, in my opinion, nothing. So disappointing in that way. But he had a good life. he had an exciting, interesting life, and he had a loving family, a wife who loved him. And after Mara died, I think he died just 3 or 4 years after that. But that's about it.